This video will talk about 1.3, Objective 2, where we identify and analyze sampling techniques. So let's answer question 1. What is the difference between a census and a sampling? So a census includes the entire population. A sampling includes only a part of the population. So that's D. Next question, what is the difference between a random sample and a simple random sample? So with a random sample, each individual has the same chance of being selected. With a simple random sample, all samples of the same size have the same chance of being selected. A. Determine whether the statement is true or false, and if it's false, rewrite it as a true statement. Using a systematic sample guarantees that members of each group within a population will be sampled. That's false. So using a stratified sample guarantees that members of each group within a population will be sampled. So that's A. So they said systematic, and it should have been stratified. Four, determine whether the statement is true or false. If it's false, rewrite it as a true statement. The method for selecting a stratified sample is to order a population in some way and then select members of the population at regular intervals. No, that's the method for selecting a systematic sample is to order the population in some way and then select members of the population at regular intervals. So this is A, and this is systematic. Okay, so those are true false questions where they switch the definitions for systematic and stratified. See that. Let's move on to number 5, identify the sampling techniques used and discuss potential sources of bias, if any. In 1965, researchers used random digit dialing to call 1,200 people and ask what obstacles kept them from attending town hall meetings. So C, this is a simple random sample that was being used since each number had an equally likely chance of being dialed. And also all samples of 1,200 phone numbers had an equal chance of being selected. Let's see. So what are potential sources of bias that were present, if any? So telephone sampling only includes people who had telephones. People who owned telephones may have been older or wealthier on average and may not have been representative of the entire population. We're talking about in 1965, right? Sorry. And then B, individuals may have refused to participate in the sample. This may have made the sample less representative of the population if people didn't answer the phone. And then C, individuals may have not been available when the researchers were calling. Those individuals that were not available may have not been representative. These individuals that were available may not have been representative of the entire population. So this happens a lot when people call during working hours and people are away at work or something like that, and The timing of such phone calls is going to miss some people, but also even if they would call what they think is around dinner time, which is a lot of times when telemarketers will call, or people polling and things like that will call, they're going to miss people that work second shift, like I did, so on. So D is not correct and E is not correct. Let's go on with number 6 here. Identify the sampling techniques used and discuss potential sources of bias, if any, and explain. Assume that the population of interest is the student body at a university. So questioning students as they leave a university dorm, a researcher asks 389 students about their drinking habits. So what type of sampling was used? This was a convenience sample because the students are chosen due to convenience of location. They just stood outside of a single dorm or residence hall. And potential sources of bias that are present, if any. B, the sample only consists of members of the population that are easy to get. These members may not be representative of the population. I'd also say in this situation, there's probably university students, for instance, that live off campus, right? That you're not, by asking people only that live on a dorm, you're missing that. But then there's different types of housing situations even on campus, and you're only asking one dorm. So there's also an issue with the personal nature of the question that students may not answer honestly. So that could be a potential source of bias. Let's look at number 7 here. Let's identify the sampling technique used and discuss potential sources of bias, if any. After a tornado, a disaster area is divided up into 250 equal grids. 50 of the grids are selected, and every occupied household in the grid is interviewed to help focus relief efforts on what residents require the most. So what type of sampling is being used? That is cluster sampling that is being used, since the disaster area is divided up into grids, and some of those grids are selected and everyone in those grids is interviewed. So that's the key thing that makes it a cluster, is that you are taking a total census of some of the clusters, as opposed to splitting it up into these groups and only taking representative samples in those areas. So what are potential sources of bias that are present, if any? So we have an issue here that certain grids may have been much more severely damaged than others. The grids that are selected may not be representative in terms of damage. And C, certain grids may have been much more severely damaged than others. So severely damaged grids may have fewer occupied households. Let's go ahead now and look at number 8. Identify the sampling techniques used and discuss potential sources of bias, if any, and explain. Every 13th person entering a restaurant is asked to choose his or her favorite meal from the list of 5 different meals that include a description of each. So this is going to be systematic sampling, which is D, because we have a method to choose every 13th person. What are potential sources of bias, if any? The wording of the question may direct respondents towards a particular meal. If there is a regular pattern to the people entering the restaurant, the sample may not be representative. So other than that, no. All right, let's look at number 9. Identify the sampling techniques used and discuss the potential sources of bias, if any, and explain. Peanuts are planted on a 51-acre field. The field is divided into 1-acre subplots. A sample is taken from each of the subplots to estimate the harvest. So 9, this is stratified sampling being used. And the reason I know it's stratified and not cluster is because we're taking a representative sample of each of the subplots, not an entire census of certain subplots, right? So a sample from every subplot as opposed to total census from a sampling of the subplots, if that makes sense. So what potential sources of bias are present, if any? So certain subplots may have more or fewer peanuts than others. Samples from these subplots may bias the overall sample. Let's look now at number 10, identify the sampling techniques used and discuss potential sources of bias, if any. Chosen at random 540 customers at a department store are contacted and asked their opinions of the service they received. So this is a simple random sample that is being used since the business is selecting from its customers at random, and all samples of 540 customers have an equal chance of being selected. Issues here are the wording of the question asked to the customers may influence them towards a particular response. The results would not be usable in this case. Let's go on to number 11. Determine whether you would take a census or use a sampling to collect data for the study described below. If you would use a sampling, determine which sampling technique you would use and explain. The average age of the 40 employees in your company. So 40 is really not that many people for you to go and ask. It's pretty easy for you to get the ages of everybody, of all these 40 people. So we'd use a census here because the population is small enough for it to be practical to record all the responses. Let's determine whether you would take a census or use a sampling to collect data for the studies described below. And if you would use sampling, determine which sampling technique you would use and explain. The most popular animation studio among 95,000 online movie rental subscribers. So we would have to use sampling for this, and the study would use a simple random sampling because it would be easy for the company to randomly select a portion of the subscribers. So let's again look at the most popular animation studio among 95,000 online movie rental subscribers. So yeah, we're going to randomly select a group of the company's subscribers. That would be easy enough to do. All right, that's it for this video, and we'll come back next time and talk about 1.3 Objective 3. See you for the next video.